Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. I have a game that I want to show you, but it's probably one of the lesser games that I've shown on my channel, but I think in the end it's going to end up being a very instructive game, and a lot of the instruction is going to come from what's going to happen at the end of the video. So if you get bored with the game and you want to skip ahead, well, that's okay. So I'm going to show you the game. It's between a beginner and an intermediate player, a tournament game. And, you know, I'm going to criticize some of the beginner's moves, obviously, because he's a beginner and it's a beginner's move. But not to make fun of him or anything, but I just want you to know, that the beginner wasn't very good and there was a lot of things that he didn't know. And, of course, we're going to try to learn from his mistakes. But, again, stick around to the end of the game or fast forward if you want, if you get bored with the game, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. All right, so here's how the game went. I'm going to click my forward button here on Lichess. E4. Black plays French defense. And now one of the principles that you learn about chess is if you're an E4 player and Black doesn't stop you from playing D4 on the second move, then the second book move is the main move is going to be D4 against everything. I think there's 14 lines, 14 moves that Black can play against E4 that allow D4, and there's 6 that don't. E6 is one of the ones that allows D4. So the main move here is to play D4, but the beginner was not aware of that, so he plays Knight C3. But Knight C3 doesn't stop D5 because Black has a pawn on E6 and the queen on D8. So it's not a terrible move, it just isn't the main move. But White didn't know any better, so he played Knight C3. You see this happen with people. A lot of people play Knight F3 against the French when they don't know anything, and they usually end up getting the exchange variation. Here White plays Knight C3, Black plays D5, and White plays D4. Unbeknownst to White, he's now transposed into the main line of the French, where he's playing the classical move Knight C3. Usually we get here by the move order. If we go back to the start, we can get to the exact same position with D4, D5, and now the main move, Knight C3. Okay, so back to the game. In the game, Black played D5, White played Knight D4, and Black plays the winnower variation, Bishop to B4. So the idea of the winnower variation is to pin the knight and to attack the pawn on E4. So now if White does nothing, if White plays, H3, Black can just play D takes E4 and he wins a pawn. Now White could counterattack and play Queen G4 and attack the E pawn and the G pawn, but that's a different story. Anyway, so when the beginner saw this pin, he said, oh no, the knight's guarding the pawn, I need to get out of the pin. And he made a beginner mistake. He gets himself out of the pin with Bishop D2. Why doesn't this work? Well, it's because Bishop to B4 threatening to win the pawn actually threatens to win the pawn two different ways. It threatens to win the pawn through the pin, but it also threatens removal of the guard. So when White plays Bishop D2, then Black could still take the pawn. All he has to do is take the knight first, Bishop takes C3, and when White takes back on C3, then take the pawn on E4. Now Black was an intermediate player, and he realized if he did that White still would have that possibility of playing Queen G4. So he decided to put it off for a move, and he played Knight to E7. White was completely unaware of what was going on here, and now White makes a really bad move. He puts his knight in a way that when Black wins the pawn, he's going to be attacking the knight. So he plays the really bad move, Knight F3. There's so many better moves that he could play. It looks superficially safe to play Knight F3. It looks like the pawn is guarded once and attacked once and all those things. But there's simple removal of the guards here that's going to cost White dearly. And Black now says, all right, enough of this silliness. You're making all these moves where I could win the pawn, and now I'm really winning the pawn. So he takes the knight, removing the guard. White says, oh, I don't want to double my pawns. I better take back with the bishop. And Black says, thanks for not guarding your pawn anymore, and I'll take your pawn and attack your knight. Now White needs to save the knight, but there's no wonderful squares to do it. He figures he'll play the aggressive knight to G5 and attack the pawn on E4. And the problem is there's LPDO, the loose pieces drop off, and the knight is just hanging up there on G5. And Black plays the reasonable move, Queen to D5, guarding his pawn on e4 and attacking the knight on g5. And now white has to figure out a way to save the knight. And right now the knight only has one safe square. He'd have to go back to the rim. And he's already down a pawn and he's losing time here. So instead, white plays queen to g4, which overworks the queen in terms of guarding the knight, because black can play a move now that attacks the queen while developing more pieces and attacking more. So white's playing hope chess here. He's not looking for what black can do. And black plays the discovered attack e5, hitting the queen with the bishop on c8, but attacking the pawn on d4 twice with the pawn and with the queen. And if white tries to play a move like queen to d1 to guard the d pawn, then black can play e takes d4, hitting the knight again, and the knight still has to be saved. So white played a move here that I guess is about as good as any. He played queen to e2, so that if black plays e takes d4, at least the bishop can move and guard the knight. But black sees a little further and sees a combination where he could win a piece. So he takes the pawn, hitting the bishop and hitting the knight. If white now plays queen to b5 check, then queen takes b5, bishop takes b5 check, and c6 will hit both bishops and win a piece. So white tries to save the knight and the bishop by playing bishop d3. And now black, again, who's an intermediate player and has seen these kind of tactics before, says, yes, but I have an interference move here. And he plays the nice interference move e3. Well, e3 is attacked 3 times and it's only guarded once, but because it's guarded by a pawn, the only safe way that white can take the pawn on e3 is with the pawn on f2, but that would interfere with the with the bishop guarding the knight on g5. And that means black's actually attacking the knight and he's attacking the bishop. And again, there's no way to save both. If white plays queen b5 check, queen takes b5, bishop takes b5 check, c6, and both bishops are still attacked. So white decides that he's going to lose 2 pawns for the piece, and he plays f takes e3. Black plays queen takes g5. White plays e takes d4. And now black plays queen h4 check, not with the idea of winning the d4 pawn, but with the idea of trading off queens when he's up an entire piece. He's up, white has the bishop pair, but he's down an entire piece, so this game is toast. And black says, well, I want to trade queens when I'm winning. So he checks and says, well, you could play g3, but then I'll take off the d pawn. If you want to save the d pawn with queen f2, I get a chance to trade when I'm ahead. So white says, I don't want to lose another pawn. I'm already down enough. Black says, good, then I'll trade queens. And now black has a trivially won endgame. Black develops the knight and hits the pawn. And now white should save the pawn by playing c3. You know, you don't want to tie down your pieces guarding pawns if you can let pawns do it. Now, it really doesn't matter because no matter what white plays, he's losing. But white should just play c3 here and then hope that his bishop pair gives him some play later in the game. Instead, he plays the very passive move, bishop c3, putting his bishop between the 2 pawns and guarding the pawn. And also that bishop is subject to attack by the knight on e7. Black can play it later on after he develops his pieces. He can play knight d5 and hit the bishop. But right now, black just wants to complete his development. He's up a piece. He doesn't need to attack anymore. So he very wisely plays castles. White says, well, let me get some more pieces out. He plays rook to e1 to hit the knight on e7, which of course is guarded by the other knight. Black plays bishop to f5, and now white completely makes a board vision error. He sees that the pawn on c2 is attacked by the bishop, but he figures if he can get this knight to move, he can win the knight on e7. So he says, I can attack that knight with a pawn, and when he moves the knight, I'm going to win my other knight, and I'll get my piece back. So he plays d5, a move that black had obviously already counted on, and black says, well, you're right, if I move that knight on c6, I lose the knight on e7, but what happens if I take your pawn with my knight on e7? And white goes, duh! What am I thinking about? I'm just losing another pawn. Now I'm down a pawn and a piece. Not only that, black's threatening to take my bishop on c3 and mess up all my pawns and get rid of my bishop pair. And black's also threatening bishop takes c2, and I can't stop both of those. Things are getting bad. Probably a better player here would resign, but white doesn't know much about resigning, so he grimly fights on, and he plays g3. Not quite sure what that does other than keep the knight on d5 out of f4. Black says, oh, I'm winning and I can get rid of your bishop pair and I can mess up all your pawns. Let me take your pawn. You take your knight and mess up your pawns. White now has double isolated pawns on the C file plus an isolated pawn on the A file. Black says, yeah, I can win that pawn, but he's not going away. Let me just get my rooks in the game. So he plays rook A d8, threatening rook to d2 check, either forcing the king up or trading off some more. White says, oh yeah, I finally get to develop my king bishop. Bishop g2, it's move 20. I finally moved the bishop. Black says, okay, very nice. I'm checking you with the rook and I'm attacking your pawn. If you want to save that pawn, you'd have to play rook e2. But then I could trade rooks and win that pawn with my bishop anyway. And I'm just up a piece and a couple pawns in the endgame. Resigns again is good. White says, never die, never die. King f3. So Black says, okay, I'm going to make sure you can't back rank mate me. The only way I could possibly lose this game is to get back rank mated. So why don't I create lift for my king so that in case I fall asleep later in the game, I can't possibly be back rank mated. So he plays the very nice move f6. He's just saying to White, look, Mr. White, if you're playing so that you're hoping for some back rank mate, it's not going to happen. Would you please resign? And White says, I don't know about that kind of stuff, so I'll play rook to d1. And Black says, well, gee, I could trade when I'm winning. That's probably the best thing to do, but I could also win more pawns, and I don't think this guy who's white is any danger to me now. I've stopped the back rank mate. Everything else is stopped. I'm going to play rook takes c2. All right, so White is kind of desperate here. He really doesn't have anything he can do. He says, let me attack the bishop with g4. And now Black says, oh, you're giving me another tactic. Well, I have a thing called overworked piece. Your king is trying to guard that pawn on g4, and he's also trying to guard that bishop on g2. And you probably don't know about overworked pieces, but if I just take that pawn on g4, guess what? It's going to deflect your king off the bishop on g2. So Black says, thanks for another pawn. I'm now up 3 pawns in addition to being up a knight. White says, oh, I didn't see that. King takes g4. Black plays rook takes g2 check. Come on, White, it's about time to resign. White says, no. I'll keep playing. Black says, all right, let me take off all your pieces. Rook takes a2. White sees no way to get into the game. He sees if he plays rook d7, Black can play rook f7. If he then plays rook d8 check, the knight's guarding that square. He just can't get in with his rook. So he waits with king g3. Black says, all right, I'll keep winning more pawns while we're waiting. Rook c2. White says, I can save that pawn with rook d3. Black says it's a good time to get my last rook in the game and trade off and go into an endgame up a knight and 4 pawns with no back rank mates. Rook d8. White says, well, I don't have much better. I will trade. And White says, let me attack that knight. Maybe I can do something. Black says, well, before I save the knight, I'll win a 5th pawn. I'll play rook takes c3 check. White says, yes, but your knight's still attacked. Maybe you'll miss it. Maybe you'll forget about it since you checked me. Black says, no, I'm not that weak. Knight e6, I'll save the knight, bring it to the middle of the board. White says, let me attack the pawn on a7. Maybe I can go after that. Maybe I can win it. Black says, but what happens if I push it? White says, well, I'll attack another pawn. Black says, well, I can push him too. And White says, aha, but now I can go back and attack the other pawn. And Black says, but I can guard that too, and I'm up a knight and 5 pawns, and, I outrank you by like 1,000,000 rating points. So why don't you resign here? And White says finally, okay, enough saying, and I'm going to resign. So if you use today's rating systems, let's say you're a tournament player and you're watching this video, and I asked you what's White's rating, what would you say it is? My guess would be maybe 800, maybe. If you said 700, I'd say maybe. If you said 900, I think that would be generous. But White's rating in this game was very, very low by current rating standards. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story about that player who was playing White. That player who was playing White, who was playing all those hope chess moves, he had a terrible first tournament and he only won 1 game out of like 6 or 7. And then in his second tournament, he wasn't any better. And again, he only won 1 game out of 7. And in his third tournament, he still wasn't any better. And he won like 1 game out of 6. So, and in a Swiss system, you're always playing people who are as good as you are. Well, luckily for White, here he was playing an intermediate player, but once he started losing all his games, eventually by the fifth or sixth round, he would play other people who were really rated low. And, he was just kind of a terrible player and losing all his games. So White went home. He was a teenager and said to his parents, wow, I'm really a terrible chess player. There must be something more to this game than brains, because I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm just losing every game. I just don't understand how I can be such a bad chess player. I thought chess was like a game for smart people who, knew how to think, and I'm pretty good with thinking, but I'm a terrible chess player. Okay, so this poor player playing White, was not only terrible in this game, but he was terrible in this whole tournament, the next tournament, the tournament after that. He really was a terrible player. And he was 16 years old, didn't start playing until he was 16. But of course, maybe you know a little bit more about the story, which is even though he was a terrible beginner and he was going into his junior year in high school, and he was still bad for the first few months in his junior year in high school, by the time this player finished his senior year, June of the following year, as a senior, he was the highest rated high school chess player in Pennsylvania. And yes, it's true, this was my first chess game in a tournament. And when people say, oh, those good players, they're always good, and, they have all that talent, and they're really good, and, they can play blindfolded and all that kind of stuff, and I don't have any talent. Well, I was just a terrible chess player when I started. I was just a complete beginner, as you could see from this game. But, as I said, within 2 years, I became the highest rated high school player in Pennsylvania. I got my rating up to 1900 in 2 years. In my third year, I got my expert title, which in those days was a big deal. In those days, you couldn't expect to be a master. A master was like out of everybody's reach. You have to be a full-time chess professional to be a master. It's much, much easier to be a master today than it was back when I was young. So, but I got to be a pretty good player. And the moral of this video is, there's hope for everybody. If I can be this bad and make this many basic mistakes in my game, mistake after mistake after mistake, missing all these basic ideas that I was doing, and I certainly didn't know what hope chess was or why I was playing so badly. It wasn't until between my third and my fourth tournament that I joined a good chess club, started talking to good players, and started to figure out what was going on. You can watch my earlier video on the improvement feedback loop, which is a really important video about getting better at chess. But in any case, I wanted to show people this video because I don't think people quite understand how bad I was when I started. And I think this game, I could show you all the games from my first tournament, and they all look like this. Yes, I did manage to win one when I played someone much, much weaker than this. The player I was playing in this game, according to the rating list here, was 1644, a young gentleman named Art Dillman, who was nice enough to go over the game with me, I think. But again, the purpose of this video is to talk to people a little bit about hope, talk to people about getting better at chess, talk to people about, yes, you can have a lot of things wrong with your game and not understand things, but if you do the right things and you start working on things to get better, you can get a lot better. I tell everybody, like when people say they don't visualize very well and therefore they don't practice visualization, I could hardly play chess in games like this, and yet 2 years later I was able to play a blindfold game without even practicing blindfold chess. Why did I do that? Because every time once I got to be a decent player, and I would play these slow games, I think this game was played at 50 moves in 2 hours, followed by 25 moves in an hour. Once you learn to move the pieces around in your head, and you practice doing it, and you practice doing it, and you practice doing it, and you spend time on every move, moving pieces around in your head and around in your head and around in your head, you slowly get better at visualization. But if you're not very good at it, and therefore you don't practice it because you just hand wave and don't actually try your best to visualize the moves in your head, then you won't get a lot better at it. Luckily for me, most of the things that I did once I got through my first 3 tournaments, most of the things that I did were putting me on the right path to getting to be a better player. I grabbed good players by the sleeves and I said, please go over my games with me and tell me what I'm doing wrong. I joined the best chess club that I could. I talked to everybody. I went over every game I could with my opponents, and I picked their brain and I picked their brain. I played speed chess on the side, But I played a million slow games. I went to the chess club every Friday night and played a slow game. I played in every tournament that I could. I kept trying and trying and trying and talking to people and playing things and doing things. And people told me you have to read annotated chess game books, and we didn't have the kind of instructive anthologies that you have today. So I would buy these books and I'd read game book after game book. I loved reading those game books. I just couldn't put them down. Every time I read a game in a game book, I wanted to read the next game and the next game. It was like reading Sherlock Holmes mysteries. And I did a lot of the basic puzzles. We didn't have the kind of good puzzle books we have today, and we didn't have the internet. We didn't have a lot of the nice tools that we have. I wasn't able to play people as much as you can by playing online now. We didn't have databases. The only computers we had in those days were giant computers that were in military complexes or in IBM, that took up entire rooms. The personal computer didn't come out for another dozen years after this game was played. So, you couldn't get your home computer and play chess against it or things like that. But, I wanted to pick people's brains, and I wanted to just get into the chess community and talk to as many people, do as many things as I could, and lose and lose and lose and lose and lose, and keep trying to find out, why did I lose? What did I do wrong? Why am I thinking wrong? What do I need to think right? Once I realized the big problem I had was I thought chess was a game where you make a move, you wait to see what your opponent does, and if he does something, you try to react to it. Well, I tried to do that, and I just lost game after game after game. And then somehow I understood the idea that no, your opponent can make unstoppable threats. If you just wait to what he does and he makes a threat that's unstoppable, you could be Magnus Carlsen, you could be the best player in the world, you could be a chess engine. It doesn't matter. Once they make an unstoppable threat, then you're going to lose material, you're going to get checkmated. So you can't wait till after your opponent moves and then go, what do I do now? That's the way that you stay a really weak player. You have to not play hope chess. You have to say, if I make this move, what are all his dangerous moves on the next move? What are all his dangerous checks, captures, and threats? And if he makes one of those dangerous checks, captures, and threats, what am I going to do on the next move to meet that threat? And if I don't have a way I can meet that threat on the next move, then I have to reject my candidate move unless I want to make a sacrifice, because I can't make a move and then have him do something where I can't do anything on the next move. You always have to, in that sense, be looking at least one move ahead to make sure that your move is safe. Once I understood that paradigm, and once I understood you had to take all of your 2 hours and do the best you could in every game, this game I just showed you, I think I only took, for those 33 moves, I think I only took maybe 30 minutes, even though I had 2 hours. Why did I play so fast? Because I thought I was playing slow. I didn't know what to think about, and I said, well, I'm doing the best I can. But once I realized on every move I have to check and see, what can my opponent do to me on the next move, and is there a way to meet that? What are his checks, captures, and threats that are dangerous? Then I realized, well, that takes time. On every single move I have to do work and figure out what he might do to me and make sure that he can't do it. Well, then all of a sudden I was taking my whole 2 hours for every game. And then I knew why all those people were standing around thinking when I was there. What are they thinking about? I would sit there and move in a minute or half a minute, and some people would be thinking 20 minutes on a move, and I'd be like, what are they thinking about? But of course, that's what they were thinking about. The good players are always trying to make sure that their opponent doesn't have anything that can beat them, besides using good strategy and everything like that. So I read all those annotated master games, I did the puzzles, I joined the clubs, I learned how to think much better, and I'm trying to pass a lot of that information along to you in my channel. This is about my 280th video or so in the channel, and I want people to go through the channel, and you can search the channel and find videos on all these different ideas about thinking process and about time management and a lot of things that you won't find in any other channel, and I'm hopeful that you will. But I want you to remember this game whenever you think, oh, it's hopeless, or this guy's no good. I played a guy in my 6th tournament who killed me, and then a year later I ended up playing him a couple more times. I transferred to his college, and then I would start beating him in some speed games, and he finally said to me, how did you get so good so fast? He couldn't believe that I was this kind of beginner player when he played me the first time, and the second time he played me a year and a half later, I was better than he was. He was a 1900 player. And to him that was like unbelievable. So, these things can happen, but you have to do the right things and you have to work. I was spending, even though I was valedictorian in my high school, I was spending all my spare time after I did my homework on going to chess tournaments and going to chess clubs and reading chess stuff. And of course, my parents didn't mind. I was the valedictorian. I was still getting my straight A's in school, but I was doing as much as I could on my chess side because that was my number one hobby. Okay, I hope you found some hope and inspiration from this video about how this person who could play so terrible could now be the one who's giving you the videos. And hopefully it'll inspire some of you out there to be able to do the same thing. And maybe in 50 years, somebody else will be watching a YouTube channel and you could say to them, when I was young, I watched Dan's video about how terrible he was, and that inspired me, and I became a good player too, and now I'm passing it along to you. Okay, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, thanks. We have 5,000 subscribers. We need to do something to thank everybody for doing that. We're still working on that. And if you haven't subscribed, great. If you would like to like the video, great. But the best thing you can do is tell other people about the channel, Dan Heisman Chess. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye.